Welcome to the I Am Podcast, where we answer all the questions about spirituality and inner peace that you ever wanted to ask, and we learn more about humanity and divinity through a better understanding of both. I am your host, Sean Webb. Okay, so going to the blackboard, today's topic is about arguments. Tons of people have arguments, right? And there are a ton of types of arguments to have. There are political arguments, religious arguments, moral arguments, personal arguments, intellectual arguments, emotional arguments. There are arguments that fall under the umbrella of relationships, such as having arguments about money issues and jealousy and the kids, how to raise them, that type of thing, etc. But the reality is that no matter what type of argument that it is, the same thing is causing it every time, regardless of what the argument's about, regardless about who it was arguing, regardless about where in the world the argument is happening. The same motivational factors are at play in creating arguments. So let's talk about those now. This is the body, mind, spirit model, and if you're unfamiliar with it, the portions of it that we're going to be talking about are discussed in episodes 4 through 8, episode 11 about anger, and a couple others. They're in the Body, Mind, Spirit 101 series. But this model is going to show us how and why arguments occur and how and why we can stop them. And so you might ask, why do I even need to understand arguments? Well, if you can understand the mechanisms within you that cause arguments and the mechanisms within other people that cause arguments, you can reduce the amount of arguments that you have, reduce the stress that you feel through interacting with those arguments, and remove arguments from your life entirely if you wish to moving forward. So why do people argue? Well, we're going to use an example of the age-old argument, nuh-uh, versus yuh-huh. Okay, so this is one of the oldest arguments on the planet. Let's say you are a yuh-huh type of person. Yuh-huh just oozes out of you, and it has become a portion of your life, and you very much identify with being yuh-huh. And so you come along a person who is more aligned with nuh-uh. And so they come up to you and they say, nuh-uh, and you say, yuh-huh. Well, what's happening here is the following. When you decided to be a yuh-huh person, what that has caused is an attachment to yuh-huh in your mind, right? And let's switch over to the mind model so that we can get a little bit better of a view of this. Okay, so you have created an attachment in your mind to yuh-huh, right? And it has become a portion of yourself at that point, your mindful understanding of existence. The attachment to yuh-huh then slides into your ego. You are a yuh-huh person. And so when you are confronted with someone who says yuh-huh ain't the way and nuh-uh is the way, what that is an outer attack on something inside the walls of your ego. Something outside the walls of your ego over here is attacking something inside the walls of your ego. And so because someone is telling you that yuh-huh sucks, well, that kind of attacks your egoic valuation, which then feeds into the equation of emotion. And if you remember the equation of emotion, our expectation or preference, as compared to by the reality as it's perceived, equals our emotional response. And in the case of somebody or something outside the walls of your ego over here, attacking something inside the walls of your ego over here, anger becomes the result. Now, depending on how attached you are to the yuh-huh is dependent on whether it's going to be a mild frustration or whether it's going to be a rage. If you are fully attached to the fact that you are yuh-huh and yuh-huh is the only way that should ever be, then when someone says nuh-uh, it makes you nuts. But if you're not so attached, if you're just kind of attached, that maybe yuh-huh is the way, you're not really sure, and somebody comes up and says nuh-uh, well, maybe it only upsets you a little bit. It only causes a mild agitation because the mindful attachment isn't as pronounced as it would be if you were a stern yuh-huh proponent. So now, in reality, what is happening here from your mind's perspective is that your attachment to yuh-huh has become a portion of your ego, and the attack from outside of somebody saying nuh-uh is basically devaluing your yuh-huh position. And so that causes an imbalance in the equation of emotion, which we know through episode 25 causes a little bit of stress, and because the mind cannot let an imbalanced equation of emotion stand, we try to take action to rebalance that equation of emotion. And so we say, yeah-huh. And so what a restatement of our position of yeah-huh is a revaluation of our ego, which then unfortunately over here in this person devalues their nuh-uh position. And so the argument ensues, because the same thing is happening in this person over here as is happening with you. Their nuh-uh position is something that they've attached to in their mind, and it has become a portion of their egoic identity right here. And so when you then repeat yeah-huh back to them when they say nuh-uh, then what that does is that creates an egoic devaluation here for them, which then feeds into their equation of emotion, feeding their anger, and then they want to re-evaluate their ego and disqualify your position as well, right? So what's really happening here when an argument occurs is a little game of egoic valuation increase and egoic valuation decrease. You're trying to support your point of yeah-huh, and thus you increase your egoic valuation, because what is yeah-huh but an attachment of your ego? So it is a portion of your mind's existence. So you're trying to increase the portion of your mind's existence, the validation of that yeah-huh position. And in turn, you're also trying to devalue the other person's position of nuh-uh, because they can't be right. Because if nuh-uh's right, then yeah-huh can't be right, right? So at the point that you're arguing, what is going on is a little game of egoic valuation and devaluation. And you're going to play this game continuously and even escalate it. And a game of escalation can begin by you saying, yeah-huh, and they go, nuh-uh, you go, yeah-huh, and then they go, well, you're stupid. Okay, so this is playing directly into the hands of the egoic valuation battle, right? They're making a direct attack on your egoic valuation by saying, well, you're stupid, because if they can prove that your attachments of your ego are less or inferior to theirs, then they win the argument by default. So then the argument of egoic valuation and devaluation makes a direct leap into your actual ego. And so they go, well, you're stupid. And then you go, well, you're stupid, right? You're trying to rebalance that equation of emotion. And then they go, well, you're stupider. And then you go, well, you're stupidest. And then they come back to you with, you're stupid to infinity. Now, I ran into you're stupid to infinity in 3rd grade. And at first I didn't know what to do with it. And it took me a whole recess to come back to, you're stupider to infinity plus 1. And I thought that was the ultimate comeback to you're stupid to infinity. But, you know, there are others that can be put together. If you'd like to use you're stupider to infinity plus 1, if you're in a tough spot, go ahead, but please give me the credit so that others know where you got that. Thank you. Okay, so to get back on track, what every argument in the world, in the history of the world, that ever has occurred, that ever will occur, comes down to this right here. The egoic valuation system. It is a battle of ego. It is a battle of attachments of the mind, because that mind has valued that attachment more than any other attachment. And that idea becomes a portion of that person's mindful understanding, and thus they must defend that mindful understanding by argument. Because if it is found that their position is inferior, depending on how well they're attached to this position in their ego, that will cause them a certain amount of grief, a certain amount of upset, a certain amount of anger, a certain amount of frustration, a certain amount of whatever. So now, what would happen if you did not have the attachment to whatever it was? Let's say you weren't necessarily a yeah-huh person, or you believed that yeah-huh was correct, but you didn't have an overly powerful attachment to it. Well, when someone comes up to you and says nuh-uh, if you don't have the attachment to defend, then you don't have the argument. And what's more, even if you do have the attachment, and let's say you are a yeah-huh type of person, that you do believe yeah-huh is a little bit better than nuh-uh, you can choose not to respond if you're looking at this process from an outside perspective, right? Because if you can see this happening, you're not involved in it occurring. And if you're not involved in it occurring, you can make mindful decisions not to let this whole process affect you. Because if you're not seeing that person's as a valuation attack, it's not going to cause the anger. It's not going to cause the frustration. If you simply see this process happening in the other person, you're going to be very aware of what's happening in that other person. You're going to be aware that it is their attachment to that idea that is causing them to try to increase the egoic valuation of that idea. And you're going to see that it's not necessarily devaluing your existence. And you're going to see that it's not an attack on you. And instead of seeing that person as attacking you with that idea, you can avoid the argument altogether and even feel compassion for that person, that they're caught in this whole mess down here, in this whole emotional influence system, in this whole attachment system, in this whole attachment of ideas that they need to forward to increase their egoic valuation, right? We all know the people that walk around forcing their ideas on other people or forcing their opinions on other people. They carry signs, you know, and a lot of them are politically charged issues. A lot of them are religiously charged issues that, you know, they're walking around with a chip on their shoulder about their attitude. It's because they're trying to increase their egoic valuation attached with that idea. And so instead of having a battle with those folks, just feel compassion that they're caught up in this whole ugly mess of attachment and egoic valuation and devaluation and the equation of emotion that then results in the equations or the emotions out here to the right that take them away from God and cause pain and suffering in their lives. You don't have to defend a position of, you know, whatever mindful idea that you think is correct. You don't have to defend that and defend your egoic position on that, and you can sidestep that whole process and simply feel compassion for the fact that the other person is caught in this loop here. Plato said, "Be kind to everyone because they are all fighting hard battles." Not exactly that quote, but it's a paraphrase of that quote, where Plato is basically saying, be kind to everybody because everyone you meet is fighting a great battle. Well, what the battle that they're fighting is this one right here. It's the one where they're caught in the mindful attachments. It's the one where they're caught in the egoic connections with their ideas. It's the one where their ego then must be defended against attacks on their ideas, which feeds into the equation of emotion that they can't help but to process, because it's kind of a natural process of the brain to process the equation of emotion, right? We're always measuring and we're always judging our perception of the world. Now, how do we not argue? Okay, well, that's pretty simple. Again, we can go right back to what we just talked about in being cognizant and aware of this process right here, the emotional influence system, the attachment system, and how we attach and create arguments through that. We can decide not to argue through identifying with this process and circumventing it mindfully. We can try to release our mindful attachments, but oftentimes this can be a little difficult. So what I would suggest is not to let your mindful attachments become a portion of your identity, a portion of your ego. Because if you don't let your attachments become a portion of your ego, then you don't fall into this mess here. You don't fall into any of this over here. Your egoic valuation and devaluation system, it doesn't feed into the equation of emotion. You don't have the emotional responses, and you don't feel the need to rebalance out an equation of emotion that isn't out of balance. So the argument doesn't occur. Now, does this mean that you don't argue and that people walk all over you for the rest of your life? Well, absolutely not. Here's why. Because a person can walk up to you and say, nuh-uh, all they want, but it doesn't change you at all, right? It doesn't change your mind. It doesn't change your perceptions. It does not change your actions, which is the critical point of consideration. The actions that we take do not have to be influenced by these nuh-uh folks, right? You could be surrounded by nuh-uh folks and then go and do your own thing every day of your entire life. And I can hear you asking, you know, isn't it important for me to defend myself, to defend my morals, to defend my beliefs, to defend my thoughts, to defend my positions on things? And from a spiritual perspective, the answer is no. It's not important for you to defend those things and to defend yourself, because in reality what you're doing when you defend yourself is you're defending your false self. It is true that we are humans. We do have a body, a mind, and a spirit as represented in the BMS model, right? And each of those things makes us different. We're all one in spirit. We have different bodies, we have different minds, and so arguing over different attachments that you make in your mind that make us human individuals and make this whole trip interesting makes as much sense to me as arguing over whether you should have blonde or brown hair. Because there's simply differences that exist in our human existences that make us unique, that make us wonderful, awesome, individual representations of God. And the spirit, if you want to exist without the strife of these other two things, and you want these things to come together and be in unity, getting your mind aligned in spirit and not having to defend the differences in mind, just like you don't have to defend the differences in your body, that's where we're all working to go. So I think we've covered enough for this week. This topic can be discussed more in depth moving forward. For instance, I know that there are probably some parents out there who are like, well, yeah, I can give up all my arguments with my teenagers, but that's not going to be very good for them from my stance as being a parent. You're 100% correct, but there are situations where, and strategies that you can use not to argue with your teenagers, but at the same time get them to do what they need to do or what you think that they should do. So we'll discuss those in some future episodes regarding parenting, and there are also some relationship situations that are somewhat specific. You know, what do we do inside the relationship? Well, we're going to favor those for some future episodes on relationships. So there are some other argument discussions that we'll have in the future, but I hope that this basically gets you a good understanding of how arguments work, of how you can step out of an argument mindfully into a position more of a spiritual nature, and you know, see how it all works so that you can remove your consciousness from the situation so as not to be affected by the situation. And I hope it gives you the knowledge and wisdom to be able to select which arguments you may or may not want to have moving into the future, because the fact is, if you decide that you don't want to have arguments, you'll never have to have another argument ever again, unless somebody's trying to physically make you do something that you don't necessarily want to do. So don't forget, you can get a free audiobook from audibletrial.com/IamSpirituality. Don't forget to hook us up on Facebook, facebook.com/IamSpirituality, twitter.com/IamSpirituality is the Twitter, and we'll wrap it up from here. Hope you're having a great week, and we will talk to you next week. Love you. Bye.